Hi everyone, thanks for attending this session. So by way of introduction, I'm Dominic Spitz, I work for MarkLogic. Unfortunately, my co-presenter, Patrick Pansier, who's head of data, digital and innovation at La Banque Postale Asset Management, couldn't make it today due to a virus that's all well known to us all now. So he was caught up in Paris, but we do have a copy of the slides that he wanted to deliver. So hopefully I can make it as interesting as he can. So today the topic is socially responsible investing using ESG data, so environmental, sustainable and governance data. It's a hot topic at the moment in the world of investment management and asset management. And so what we'd like to cover today is the project that we've helped deliver with La Banque Postale Asset Management towards sustainable investing. Just to give you some kind of key stats, it's about $9 trillion worth of ESG AUM up for grabs from investment management professionals. And so a lot of these investment management and asset management professionals are looking to build new financial products that are aimed towards environmental, sustainable and governance goals, but also decarbonize their portfolios and the portfolios that they manage. So the agenda for today, so we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of La Banque Postale Asset Management, the structure, and kind of an introduction as to what they do. We'll be talking about one of their key initiatives around socially responsible investments. We'll be talking about the high value data that they have to make use of in order to build and develop these new financial products, but also decarbonize their existing financial products. And we'll be talking overall around ESG data management and how managing this data can be quite complex. I was thinking this morning about how you can relate to investments, and for those of you who live in the UK and contribute to private pension schemes, you'll often know that you're investing into a fund and you'll maybe have a risk appetite for those funds. But very often you're not given further visibility into those funds. You might be told that you're invested in other funds or equities or bonds. But further than that, it's hard for you to get a good idea around the environmental or social impact of those investments. So we're all investing money into these pension funds, but it's very hard for us to know, especially if you've got multiple pension funds across multiple providers, to know what the social and climate impact is. And so when you relate that to an asset manager or an investment manager who are managing multiple different portfolios and instruments, it becomes all the more difficult. Sorry. So in terms of La Banque Postale Asset Management, for those of you who've heard of the organization, they're part of another organization called La Banque Postale, which is often related to as La Banque Citoyenne Française, so the citizen bank, and they are part owned by La Banque Postale. And so La Banque Postale Asset Management's activities typically revolve around investments in assets and equities and other financial instruments. And they have a kind of really interesting strategy that's up on their website. They have an aim to decarbonize their entire portfolio by 2050, with a pretty ambitious goal to decarbonize at least 80% of the portfolios that they manage by 2030. And this is why they undertook such a project to look at how they could leverage existing ESG data to help them achieve those goals. So, a bit of an introduction, maybe for those of you who aren't part of the kind of asset management or investment management world. We first need to kind of define, well, what is a social and responsible investment fund? And ultimately what it is, it's a choice made by a fund manager or an asset manager to invest in companies who have environmental or sustainable or governance goals and reducing the carbon footprints. And so typically these are funds that have initiatives towards achieving those goals. And so there's I don't want to say a problem, but how do you choose these investments? How do you go about investing this money? and how do you make those decisions as to what companies and entities out there have environmental, social, and governance goals. And so the way to kind of look at it is to compare, well, what is, the world of, people would call it classic portfolio management, compared to the world of socially responsible investments. And so typically on the classic portfolio management side, you'll do multiple type of activities, right? One could be to look at the historical price of an asset or an equity, but also taking into account other quantitative data that you typically find on a balance sheet, right? Are the companies, selling? How well are they doing? What are their revenues? What's their profitability? Are they in debt? And you'll typically look at all these different data points. They're typically structured in rows and columns, right? In tables. So it's pretty structured data in that respect. But the other thing that you would do typically when you manage these portfolios is talk to the companies. So this is more of a kind of qualitative element where you will, as an investor, go and talk with a company to understand their strategy. And ultimately, your goal is to make a decision looking at a number of different companies and organizations out there as to where you want to invest your money. Now, on the right-hand side, what you see is the SRI, or socially responsible investment. So there's another angle there. You'll still do the same type of activities that you do in what we would refer to as classic portfolio management. So you'll still look at the balance sheets, you'll still look at the numbers, you'll still analyze those companies in the same way, leveraging the same data that you would in classic portfolio management. But and you'd still go and talk to the business, and you'd still try and go and understand what their strategy is. But there's this extra financial data that you have to make use of to understand whether companies are driving towards those sustainable goals. Excuse me, just have to. Yeah, and so typically on the left-hand side, when you think of it as structured data where you might have quants looking at these balance sheets and looking at these numbers and doing calculations, well, on the right-hand side, when you're looking at socially responsible investments, you have to take into account other things. So it could be a corporate social responsibility, which is typically not defined necessarily in terms of numbers and data and quantitative data. It might be qualitative aspects. And so what you find here is that you're having to deal with different types of data. On one side, structured data. On another side, unstructured data, text, and those type of things. And very often, these policies can be found online. They can be transcripts. They can be found in annual reports. They can be found on websites. So in multiple different places. So moving on. So this is more of a deep dive into, well, what data is available out there for these asset managers and investment managers to be able to make the decisions. And so typically you've got established players out there who combine and go and fetch the data from the companies that are reporting these KPIs or ESG KPIs. And this is a pretty mature offering. It's typically what people would already look at when doing classic portfolio management. So you've got companies like MSCI, Moody's, Refinitiv, who are pretty well established, have a way of doing, and basically provide this data to the asset managers and the investment managers to enable them to make decisions. But you've got these new players in the market because ESG and sustainable investing is, I don't want to say new because it's been around, but it's had a kind of renewed focus, especially with things like Paris climate agreements, etc. So you have these new players out there who are compiling information. Now, the difference there is that they're not necessarily compiling information in the same way that the traditional or generalist data providers would package up and share that information. And so you've got some specialists out there like Carbon for Finance, CDC, Biodiversity, and they, like I said, don't send the information to the asset managers and the investment managers in the exact same way. or with the exact same structure. So you add a bit of complexity there in terms of the data. And then there are other sources of information. So if you look at non-governmental organizations who might be analyzing companies, they're also producing reports. Now, these reports are full of very relevant and actionable information, but typically they're not easy to exploit at scale. These are typically documents and reports and text-heavy, and so it's not as easy as extracting, for example, information from a table. Now you're looking at extracting information from text, as an example. And to kind of compound it, when you look at La Banque Postale Asset Management, for example, they are looking at a portfolio of about 30,000 companies. And so they'll be taking data from sources like MSCI, Moody's, and the generalists, but they'll also be taking in information for these 30,000 companies from these other providers who are more of the kind of specialist kind. And they'll be taking in information from these NGOs or corporate social responsibility policies online. And so you can imagine that we're not really talking here about big data in the traditional sense of high volumes of data. And what we're talking about here is the variety of the data. We're talking about the complexity of marrying up structured and unstructured information and being able to make it actionable. So the quants, or the people who are developing and building these algorithms or looking at developing these new financial products, have access to the information they need to be able to build these new products. And so that's the slight difference. We're not really talking about volumes of market data that are coming in in a low latency way. We're looking at complex data that we're trying to integrate and make actionable. And there are two kind of main use cases here that we typically look at. One is reducing the footprint of an existing portfolio. So you have your incoming data sources. How do you map these data sources to your internal reference data? So you might be taking in data from the specialists and the generalists. How do you marry this up to the companies that you have in your portfolio and leverage those ESG KPIs and scores to make a decision as to whether a company stays in your portfolio or not? And another use case, which is the one that I touched upon, which is, well, with all these corporate social responsibility policies and annual reports, how do you, at scale, extract information from these documents, marry it up to the structured information that you have, and make that data actionable for your end users or your consumers? And typically what La Banque Postale are doing now are using natural language processing techniques to extract that information from these unstructured documents. So for those of you not familiar with MarkLogic, so MarkLogic's what we call a semantic data platform. And at a very high level, we specialize in taking data from a variety of different systems, and so data that doesn't look the same, so different structures, different types of data. And we can bring these into our platform differently than what we would do in a kind of relational world, whereby you would have to model upfront. So with MarkLogic, we can load the data as it is from these different sources, and then we can run processes to harmonize that data, deduplicate that data, and enrich that data with things like metadata, to then pass it on to downstream systems. And if you look at the case of La Banque Postale Asset Management, once they bring in these information sources and they harmonize them and enrich them, they're then able to do other things. So for example, one of them is, actually I've got it, sorry. Here is to create peer groups, right? So if you're comparing companies in the manufacturing sector, you might want to isolate manufacturers and look at the different ESG scores that are applied to those manufacturers. And again, your ultimate goal here is to make a decision as to what company you're going to invest in that shares the values or the goals that you're trying to achieve, which are typically decarbonizing portfolios. I'm sorry, I'm running up against time, so if you want to come and talk to us afterwards, we'll be at stand 927. And we provide this data to various consumers. And so these consumers might want to consume that data through dashboards, through tools like Tableau or Power BI. But we also make that data available through REST APIs. And so there are different groups of people who want to consume that information in different ways. And so we have researchers now, we have other groups within the Banque Postale Asset Management who are seeing the information in this consolidated information and who want access to this information as well. And with MarkLogic, we have security models whereby we can decide on certain roles or groups of people wanting to use the data, what they get to see and how they get to use it. I think the really interesting, we were recently speaking with another asset manager about this project, and they said, this is great. We've done something very similar, but they did tell us it took us 2 years to get to where we are. And I think because of the flexibility of MarkLogic's platform and the iterative way of developing and the partnership that was evident between the IT teams and the innovation teams and the business teams, we're able to sit down kind of in a very agile and sprint way on deciding, well, what are the requirements that we're trying to meet here and what can we achieve quickly. And so we did a 6-week proof of value, which ended up with us delivering a prototype based on the business requirements that we had gathered. And with less than 10 days of development, and the system was put into production in 3 months. And I think what's really interesting here is to see this collaboration between the business and IT. So they're sitting down every week and looking at, well, how can we enhance this platform? What are some of the business requirements that we have? And how can we leverage the data platform that we're developing, the ESG data platform, the data hub, to answer more questions across the business? And so what La Banque Postale have told us is they've really increased their speed of innovation because the business users are no longer waiting, months or years to get access to the information they need. They can actually get it very quickly. And in terms of what's next, so we kind of touched upon this with the kind of unstructured or other types of data that they would want to leverage. I still have 10 minutes. Also, sorry. I thought I had 1 minute left. Okay. So they are now looking at how can they take information from websites, take information from documents such as corporate actions to enrich the model with additional metadata. And we actually have another tool within MarkLogic called Semaphore, which enables us to do this fact extraction from documents, where we can also add metadata and enrich that data and have multiple more uses for that data. And yeah, I think it's been a really interesting project. The feedback from La Banque Postale Asset Management is that they've had great feedback from their business users, from their front office users, from their quants. And they really think that MarkLogic and this project that they've done is going to help them achieve those goals to decarbonize their portfolios, but also create new financial products to capture the kind of new market and capture funds that are rolling into ESG type funds. So I'm really sorry I had 30 minutes on the presentation, which was my timer. So I've finished the slides, but I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you. Or if you want to ask questions, we're at stand 927. No? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.